Hey, welcome. This is Off the Couch. I'm Dr. Greg Case, and I'm here with producer Brian Gomez.
Happy Monday, you guys.
And also on the board is Gus. Hey, Gus.
Hello.
It's good to see you here. Today on Off the Couch, oh, by the way, I'm a psychologist. We're doing a psychology thing in case anybody's wondering. It's psychology for everyday life. But I forgot to say the tagline. So today on Off the Couch, we're going to do, for This Week in Psychology, 3 great studies that came out this week. Is smiling the secret to seeing happiness in others? Why negatives speak louder than positives in relationships? And how climate change is really freaking teens out. And for Psychology in the News, we're going to talk about the tragic revelation that we all just heard about Wendy Williams. So the first study is smiling the secret to seeing happiness. So this study, just to give it to you right up front, this study said that smiling for just a split second, makes people more likely to see happiness in expressionless faces. This was kind of a tremendous study. It may not seem like a big deal to most people, but it's not just about making you happier. It's about seeing happiness with others. And when you see happiness with others, especially people that you're with, you tend to feel better yourself. There was some old research. It's kind of interesting to me. I used to really quote this research a lot. It said just putting a pencil or a pen in your mouth like that will make you move your, or just putting it in your mouth between your teeth, for those of you that are listening and not seeing me, when you put a pencil or a pen between your teeth, it'll sort of flex your face in such a way that you have sort of a half smile. And that sort of smile actually increases people's mood. We also find this to be the case when you actually have people put on a little half smile. And we give this advice in a type of technique we call DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. We advise standing with a half smile just to kind of help regulate the mood and sort of uplift the mood. How about that, Brian?
That's cool. I mean, it makes sense, but it's just you never really think about it that way. It's almost like fake it till you make it.
It's fake it till you make it. But actually this sends a message back. And there's even some older research that shows that Botox, or actually it's newer than the research I just quoted, but it shows that Botox helps people feel better, oddly enough, because it relieves frown expressions, which sends a negative mood sort of signal to people. So we know about these things, that facial structure can send a message back to you about how you are feeling, and it will actually help regulate your mood. That's why this new research was kind of groundbreaking, because they looked at not just how it makes you feel, they looked at how it makes you feel about seeing how you see others. So this is new research out of the University of Essex in the UK. And this is a study published in Social, Cognitive, and Affective Neuroscience. And they used a painless electrical current that manipulated muscles momentarily into action into creating a short, uncontrollable smile. So it's basically, they gave a little electric zap on the head. They had put on these sort of like, these hat-like devices that had electrodes on them, and they positioned in such a way it gave a little electrical shock that had the muscles just flex for just a split second. In fact, it was 500 milliseconds, or half a second, when they did this. They had 47 people take part in the study. And then they showed these digital avatars, and they were asked to assess whether they looked happy or sad. And then in half the participants, they induced that weak smile for half a second, just half a second. The other half, they didn't do that. So I have, for the people who are watching on YouTube, we have the slide of the ambiguous faces they showed, but I'll just describe them to you. Can you put that up, Gus? The ambiguous faces. So you can, the ambiguous faces are basically these AI-generated faces, and it's that you can't tell whether this is a man or a woman. This is just sort of a face without hair, without hairstyle. And they manipulated this face from a neutral position to slightly 10% happier, 20% happier, 30% happier, 10% sadder, 20% sadder, 30% sadder. So they just manipulated, and then they had people look at these faces and they had them rate how happy they perceived the faces. And the findings were that a controlled, brief, weak activation of facial muscles can literally create the illusion of happiness in others who otherwise appear neutral or even slightly sad looking. So if you want to perceive happiness in your environment, it seems that having a slight smile on your face can help you filter in more positive information, especially about other people. And I think this has a very practical everyday application, just like we've talked about, like just walking on the street and seeing people. When you see people who look rather surly and you smile, they may not smile back, but you might not perceive them as negatively if you yourself have a slight smile on your face. That's practical, don't you think?
No, yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, it's kind of infectious, that smile. When you smile at somebody or somebody smiles at you randomly, you can't really help but to smile back. And it actually feels good, oddly enough, just randomly.
I always feel good when I do it. And other uses, this could actually have some groundbreaking uses, especially in things like Parkinson's or autism, where they have impaired facial recognition. So they don't see others in quite the same way. And also depression.
That's what I was going to ask you, if anything has been done with depression and any studies on that.
Yeah, well, they haven't studied that yet, but that is something that probably this could be put into use. With depression, we have several strategies we use with people, both behavioral and cognitive. Behavioral are sort of like emphasizing things like mastery, social connection, doing things that are enjoyable. You can do task-oriented activities that come to completion so that you can feel that's usually in the mastery area. And then you can also work on your cognitions, negative cognitions. What this does, though, is kind of interesting, is it helps people filter in more positive cognitions or more positive assessments of other people's moods. So I'm not sure how it will fit in to treating depression, but I think it definitely has a use. So this is kind of fun. Sometimes we see these little studies that actually have big impacts. The next one actually spoke to me rather loudly because I do couples therapy. And let me tell you, couples therapy can be one of the most difficult therapies. So you think it's two people in the room, so it's just twice as much. It's actually like 10 times as much. It's like when my sister had twins and she said, it wasn't like having two children. It was like having 22 children. They just sort of, they multiplied on each other. They thought alike. They did things alike. They were always working with and against each other. So
it amplified everything.
It amplified. So we've known for a long time that negatives are more powerful than positives in relationships. So I just want you to picture this. So you picture this, you guys. After a long day, a couple cuddles together while watching a favorite show, taking comfort in each other's touch, scent, and voices until one partner makes an insensitive comment. So what do you think? Will the comment be quickly forgotten? Or does this signal trouble for the future of the relationship? What do you think, Brian?
It depends what he said.
Very good. What about you, Gus? Do you have any opinion there?
Yeah, I don't know. I think definitely it would have a long-lasting impact. Or it's like one of those things you need to address immediately, or else it just sits there, adds on top of other things.
Yeah, you'll marinate in that if you don't fix it on the spot, I would say.
Yeah, I would say you're not far off. You're going to see new research out of Cornell University, which is in New York, published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, did a study, 100 undergraduates in exclusive heterosexual relationships. This is the first. This was quite a big study. They first completed surveys. Just a word about undergraduate research. So they did 100 undergraduates. When you take a psychology class in a university, typically the very first class, like Psych 101, or in my school it was called Psych 10, whatever it is, that first class, typically what you have to do is to enroll in a number of hours of research participation, and you do that as basically you're one of the people they're studying. So I'm sure that's what they did here at Cornell, and that's why you always have so many undergraduates represented in research and these college age people that are represented in research, but they're a ready sample. Like you can go and do studies on them, and they're willing, and they have to do it. They get college credit.
They're the lab rats.
They're the lab rats. But, it's fun. I did it. I thought it was kind of fun. And I think it's always a good thing to do. But this is why we see so many studies with undergraduates. So here, they did a study with 100 undergraduates in exclusive heterosexual relationships. They first completed surveys about their relationships. Then they did tests on the computers of what's called implicit partner evaluation. So it's what they're thinking about, and they did this through reaction times about their partner. So I didn't dive into the exact assessment method they used, but it would be going on, and they have to answer in a certain amount of time in a certain way, and it will reflect if they're thinking about their partner in positive or negative ways. They also kept diaries for 2 weeks, noting positive and negative behaviors in their partners and themselves. So they got all this data. Then they went back, these researchers went back and reassessed the same pool of people 3 months later. So they saw how they were. So their results showed that if the study participants more easily associated negativity with their partner in the first assessment, that's primarily in that computer game they played, and they reported more negative behaviors from their partner in the diaries, those diary assessments then predicted lower relationship satisfaction by the second assessment. So basically, if you're starting to look at your partner in a negative way, it might be a downhill progression. So that, they didn't do any intervention. Gus, you mentioned intervening and trying to cut that off at the pass. And that's probably good advice, because people just seem to get worse over time sometimes. So the findings are that the more we harbor implicit judgments about our partner that are negative, the more likely we are to perceive negativity in interactions. That literally is the snowball effect. So this is all going to lead to decline in relationship satisfaction over time. Why do you look so thrilled then?
No, I'm just laughing because I'm like, if it's bad, it's just going to get worse. Unless you...
Not necessarily. No, that's not the case. I do a lot of couples therapy, so I can tell you it is definitely not the case. But if it's bad, we need to cut that one off at the pass. We need to stop the snowball from rolling down the hill, essentially. And we need to redirect it in a different way.
Gotcha. I was thinking jump ship.
Nope. Yeah, no, we know, in fact, that people learn to live with their problems versus compounding them. But it doesn't go the other way, and I think this is also something that's interesting. Positive implicit associations don't forecast more positive partner perceptions or of relationship outcomes. So if you're looking at your partner in a positive way, that doesn't forecast that things will be good in the future.
Damn. Oh, man.
Okay. I was curious about, I think this is a limited finding. I don't know that they were kind of looking at some very specific things. And I want to talk about why I think there's more nuance to that. So the tendency here that the researchers are talking about from Cornell is that there's a negativity bias with implicit partner evaluations. That basically people look toward the negative. If it's there when they're thinking about their partner, they have stronger implicit negative evaluation. So basically, when you're looking toward the negative, you're looking toward negative things. and you see it, then and you're thinking about your partner, things can, like kind of snowball. So we've got this negativity bias. But if you're looking for it in the first place, you're going to be more likely to find it. We have stronger implicit negative evaluations. More people with stronger implicit negative evaluations. Man, I'm not going to be able to keep saying that. We're more likely to report instances where their partner behaved negatively. So it's like the worse you think, the more you're going to find. So if you're scanning for negatives, you're going to find them.
Is it also that like we are looking too much for the perfection part of it, that the negative or anything that's off, it seems bigger than it is?
So let's talk about perfectionism just a second, or looking for perfection in a relationship. Because if you're looking for perfection in a relationship, you're demanding or you're creating an absolute belief that relationships have to be perfect. So if you're doing that, you're saying, here are these absolute rules I'm trying to get my partner to follow, and if they don't follow, they're bad or wrong. So yes, by having that mindset, you are going to have someone who's always violating your rule set, because who's perfect besides yourself? I mean, I don't want to exclude current people in the room, but I can tell you I do not fit into that category. Far from perfect. But the more people recalled negative behaviors, the less satisfied they were with the relationship 3 months later. So it is really kind of a problem to kind of focus on these negative behaviors. And yet, what the study is saying is it's perfectly natural to do so. So, and this is why we're kind of caught in this kind of interesting thing here. Even when people consciously reported only very positive feelings toward a loved one, like they're like, oh yeah, no, my partner's the best in the world, we're perfect, completely simpatico, blah, 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 they'll still think about simultaneously positive and negative implicit evaluations. So they could be saying, oh, my partner's the best in the world. They don't do the dishes. We have the best life together, but, I get really bored sometimes. They could think these things. That's because our mind sort of continually scans for negative.
And does that happen? I mean, I'm sure it does, right, for like ourselves, like the self-talk or self-point of view on that?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because we may remember negative experiences more because the potential threats may be more consequential. So it's often thought, and there have been different theorists that have talked about this, is this sort of tendency to look for negatives. But I tend to base it more in fear, that we're always scanning the environment, always trying to prevent bad things from happening. For some people, this can be absolutely crippling, but usually what it helps us do is to navigate the world. We can walk through things. When we're driving, we do this. We're driving, we're having a good time, we're going down the street, but we're continually paying attention to, could this car cut in? Could that car do this? Is this light going to turn this? Oh, is there a pothole? Oh, blah, blah. You're always paying attention to these negatives, and you sort of discard them in the next second, but you're always continually aware. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Negatives weigh more. So this is a parallel to other findings, and I said I'd talk about this. John and Julie Gottman actually have a theory that I follow, though it's more than a theory. They've proven it with research, that there's a 5-to-1 positive to negative behavior ratio in happy couples. So that means that healthy, happy couples have 5 positive behaviors to every 1 negative. So that person on the couch who said that negative thing, as long as there were 5 positives, then they're going to be able to weather that storm a little more easily. But if there's trouble, if there are not a lot of positives banked, I call this an emotional bank account with my couples. If they don't have a lot in their emotional bank account, it's going to make it hard when they have to make a withdrawal.
So it's like they can be mean as long as they give 5 compliments.
No. Because you're mean, and it takes more out of the account. And that can start to really screw with the ratio. So we all do thoughtless things, and we violate other people's expectations too. It's like we could think we're doing a super nice thing, like doing the dishes. We're going to do the dishes and we're going to put them all away. And then our partner comes down and says, where did you put the glasses in the wrong place and you put the plates in the wrong place? And they're perceiving this negative to what you were just trying to do a positive. So you're trying to navigate this whole thing. So do not do anything intentionally negative, because you're going to have lots of negatives come along naturally. That's just how life works. Now, we know that troubled couples have a 1-to-1 ratio of good to bad. So when you're just basically having negatives along with positives, that's when the trouble really starts to happen. But couples can stay there for a long, long while and don't tend to break up until this ratio, 0.8 to 1, good to bad. That's basically that all of a sudden there's less good than bad. And Lenore Walker, who I've quoted here before, I believe she's the creator of the battered woman syndrome, and she's one of these big figures in psychology. She said people don't leave a relationship until the bad outweighs the good. Very simple. So keep up the goods. So what does this mean? It's normal to think about negatives in relationships. The problem is if you dwell on the negatives, bolster your relationship with positive behaviors, putting money in the emotional bank, and what we talked about on a previous podcast, self-compassion toward yourself when you do screw up increases your partner's satisfaction with the relationship. So if you screw up, give yourself a break, understand what happened, forgive yourself, and believe it or not, that will actually help your partner to be happier with the relationships. How about that? I mean, it really sounds like a really nice thing. Okay, so climate change. Now we're going to go to that. Climate change is freaking teens out. Now, is climate change a concern of yours, Brian?
Yeah, I actually saw something that I think the New York Times published today, that the currents that control the different regions of the water are having some issues because a lot of the glaciers are melting and there's a lot more fresh water being poured into the ocean instead of the amount of salt water. So there has to be this balance, and that's going to start throwing things off. So yeah, I was just reading up about it today. Not looking good.
It's freaky. What about you, Gus? Climate change an issue of concern?
It's a very big concern of mine. I would say with the recent data, I'm sort of getting more cynical about it, but yes, it is a big issue.
It is a big issue, and it's a big issue for high school students right now, and I want to talk about this study. But just to let you know, when I was in elementary school, when I was especially in junior high, climate change was actually kind of a big issue too. We were really into recycling, and my science fair project when I was in 8th grade was I wanted to create a solar car. I failed miserably, mind you. I failed miserably, but I was so fascinated by that. So it's been around for a little while, but it is gaining steam. That one is snowballing too, and not in a good way. Okay, so they did a study of 38,616 high school students, just to be very specific. They did it in 22 public school districts in 14 states. And the findings were 25% of those students, 25% or 1/4 of the 38,000 experienced the highest number of days in a climate disaster. So what they did is, 1/4 of the students they looked at were in these climate disaster zones. So they had to have experienced things like hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, droughts, and wildfires. I bet we were there, California. We didn't add earthquakes, but I don't know that that's a climate change thing, but who knows? And they had to experience one of these climate change disasters within the last 2 years, and they also looked at a group within the last 5 years. So very specific, but this is how we do research. We have to break it into these categories. They found that the people who lived in the climate disaster zones where they had a climate disaster in the last 2 years or 5 years had 20% higher odds of developing mental distress than their peers who had not experienced any climate disaster events. 20% higher. Now, you're thinking to me, oh, Greg, you go and you ask somebody, are you afraid more because of climate disasters? You know, are you concerned about that? That isn't what they did. Do you know what they did? They did this in much the way they've done other big studies on population. They looked at these interesting correlations. So they did a study. They took a study that was done in 2019. This is before the pandemic, so we can't blame the pandemic. And they looked at the study on on SAD and hopelessness and short sleep in something called the U.S. Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This has been going on a while. The U.S. Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And they also looked at disaster data from FEMA. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You hear about it all the time. They're the ones that go out during disasters and administer aid and give money and give food and get people shelter, all these things. So they just looked at who's in a disaster zone, and then, you know, they looked at the survey data. So they just looked at how the two were correlated, and this is published in Prevention Medicine Reports. They found the strongest effects on mental distress were in the 2 years immediately following a climate disaster, and that the effects gradually weakened 5 to 10 years after the disaster. Doesn't that makes a lot of sense? But if you're having climate disasters, you're going to be more freaked out. Roughly half of the adolescents, though, and you're going, oh, aren't adolescents just primed to have mental distress? The answer is yes. Roughly half of adolescents experience a mental health disorder in their childhood or teen years, according to U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. But here it's 20% higher in climate disaster zones. So here we're taking a group that's already high need, what we might call even, well, there's some words in like high acuity, like people that might be more risk for a number of reasons, and they're going to have more needs, and then we're gonna pile it on one more with a climate disaster threat. What we also see is there's inequity. Of course, I think this is well known that lower income communities are hit hardest by climate disasters. They tend to be built in areas that might be more prone to flooding, or more like we saw this in New Orleans, really, or in Houston too. We saw this exact thing. But all these areas where there might be lower socioeconomic status, in these more high risk areas, that can even compound issues quite a bit.
I mean, I'd be freaked out if I lived in Oklahoma and had to worry about tornadoes all the time. That'd be one freaky one.
But you know what? Everywhere I go, people are like, I don't want to experience earthquakes. And I'm like, I don't want to either, but I have quite a few.
That's true. That's true.
So, you know, I think it's just everyone has their own thing. So this climate change anxiety, though, is actually a real thing. This is what fascinated me, is I found a different report that looked at this. If you go to our YouTube, by the way, if you go to YouTube, go to youtube.com/Dr. Greg, DRGREG, and then go and look at the podcast. And then if you click on the description, you can get a link, all the links to all the studies we talked about. So there are two different studies here, one looking from the teen or people point of view, and one looking from mental health point of view, and to talk about the next dynamics I'm about to talk about. So this is climate change anxiety, and I confess, I've talked about climate change anxiety and mental health, but I've never thought this was a disorder. But here it is. The people are talking about this called climate anxiety or eco-anxiety. And in the worst cases, climate anxiety disrupts the ability to function day to day. So yeah, when we look at a disorder, the thing about having a kind of a normal concern and it moves up to a disorder, if it inhibits your relationships, your work, or other areas of your life for usually a significant amount of time. And that significant amount of time can be different in different areas. With like a grinding anxiety, we look for a long window of time, about 6 months, because we all have anxiety for short spurts. But with major depression, we look for this rather short period of 2 weeks. You also have to meet all these criteria about symptoms. So here with climate anxiety, if it actually disrupts your function day to day, that is a serious problem. So children and young people feel alienation when they do have the serious issue. They feel alienation from their friends and family who are probably poo-pooing this or thinking, what's going on? You're a little overly concerned about this. Distress when thinking about the future. And they have intrusive thoughts about who will survive in the future. So they might do obsessive behaviors like obsessively check the weather or they check for extreme weather, which I find myself doing right now because we have been having so much rain and I've been having so many leaks. I have to say I've been doing some obsessive weather checking. I don't know about you guys. Reading climate change studies and pursuing radical activism. That's different than just kind of regular activism. I think these are the people who go and throw paint on people. Or, tie themselves to trees. I'm not sure. Some people even consider suicide. So, yeah, that's quite serious. In her book, A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, Sarah Ray describes a student with such severe self-loathing eco-guilt that she stopped consuming much at all, including food. And this was interesting to me because that seems rather extreme. But sometimes I feel guilt, I admit, because I like yogurt and I eat these containers of yogurt and they're in plastic from the store.
Yeah.
And I feel guilty about that. And I'm like, and I try to wash it out and recycle it, knowing that perhaps it won't land in the right place. Who knows about recycling? It's all, once it leaves your house, who knows where it goes. And then it's this kind of eco guilt, and I feel it at a low level. So I can imagine that if you felt it at a very high level, that could be quite disabling.
Well, in a way, we're all contributing. I mean, everything we do pretty much contributes to it, as bad as it sounds.
No, it's true. And I forgot my water bottle. I try to bring my own water bottle. And today I had to get a plastic bottle from the studio because I needed water. And I couldn't do it without a bottle.
Yeah, I mean, even when we buy clothes, I try not to shop often anymore, too, just because I used to before, but...
You were quite the closeaholic.
Yeah, the fashion industry is a big contributor to like all the pollution that's happening too. So if you can, shop vintage or something, or just not shop as much, get staple pieces.
That is very good advice. In fact, I had one client who did all her shopping in thrift stores and always looked amazing. I mean, I couldn't even tell you. Her sense of style and it was amazing. She's like, "Oh yeah, it's my hobby."
And the vintage stuff is in, so you don't have any excuse,
Yeah. Well, I keep my clothes so long they become vintage.
I'm gonna go into your closet.
It's a sad thing. Okay, so normal range bleeds into decisions. So if you have a normal range anxiety, think what we're talking about: whether or not to have children, where to live, what to do for work. All of those make questions. And it's interesting about where to live. I've thought, I grew up here in Southern California and I'm like, my family is here. And I think, what if it gets too hot, or something like that. I don't think it'll happen in our lifetimes, but the weather seems to be changing rather rapidly.
I was going to ask you that too, if compared to when you were growing up to now, if the weather, because,
We did not have rain like this.
Oh.
No.
Oh.
I grew up down by the beach, but I can't imagine it was all that different. We just did not have rain like this. We did have, I remember a couple of times when I was a kid, I saw hail. So that did happen. And that was exciting. We had tons of fog, but we had rain. But our rain was so light that when I moved to Texas, which does have, I don't even know how to describe that rain, like tropical torrential rain. When I moved there, then I really experienced something different.
And the hail.
The hail.
And then it snows sometimes.
Destroys cars.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything happens in Texas.
Texas is actually hardcore when it comes to weather. Okay, so how to treat. Now, this is interesting too because this isn't a specific phobia like fear of snakes or heights. Rather, it's a parallel more to generalized anxiety disorder, which is a chronic condition that involves excessive worry about everyday situations, and it can make daily life feel like a constant state of fear, dread, or worry. And you're diagnosed if it lasts 6 months or more, as I said. But this is kind of a news-related thing. So when I was a kid, nuclear anxiety was the thing. We were all afraid of being hit by a nuclear bomb. We did duck and cover. We had air raid drills as a kid. I lived by a weapons depot. I lived by McDonnell Douglas, which did the space shuttle. So it was, and they did the rocket to the moon. I mean, like this place actually did space stuff, so they thought this was a likely target. So we would have to practice all these drills. And there was a fear of nuclear war and its consequences. So this is just interesting that this has been around a while. Now it's being more redirected to anxiety. And so this is a type of anxiety you can't personally evolve. And just to go over really quickly, too, that the article addressed, or one of the articles addressed climate anxiety versus climate denial. And I had never seen this, too, and it makes a huge amount of sense that extreme climate anxiety is really the same as people who have extreme climate change denial. So that climate anxiety and climate change denial are kind of the same thing at two ends of a continuum. The aspects of the feeling are of being overwhelmed, and it's thought that some people can't tolerate the anxiety, so they spin off into believing someone who gives them fake promises. So they spin off into believing, there's not really climate change. This is just weather, or whatever they say. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's really overwhelming climate anxiety is a strategy that can be crippling, but also climate change denial is also a strategy to help deal with the anxiety. So
a lot of anxiety going around.
I just thought that was interesting. It's good to keep in that middle range. We always try to help people keep in the middle range. So this is just fears basically can be crippling. So fear of disempowerment can lead people to turn inward, focus on self-preservation and survivalism rather than the more collective means that needed to actually address the issues and here climate change. So we want people actually to focus, to be less anxiety so they can have more productive behavior. Normal range anxiety, if you're having normal range anxiety, you do internal, external coping, like calm your internals, calm the nervous system, relax, take breaks, self-talk. External, healthy activism, focused work, individual behaviors like recycling or limiting consumption, voting for candidates and causes who support your vision, and other behaviors like I drive an electric car. As I said, that's always been important to me. But if you have crippling anxiety, that does need treatment. So you might encounter something similar to a generalized anxiety treatment, plus possibly OCD treatment if the unusual behavior and obsessions accompany. And that's a little bit different of a treatment. The article said basically like, at first, one of the articles I was reading was kind of addressing it as if there wasn't treatment available, but there really are treatment. It's just that you have to categorize it in the right type of treatment behavior. So we might do things like written exposures and exposure with response prevention to different behaviors, and do written exposures to the unknown, which is very common in generalized anxiety treatment. So not that we're going to go into that, but just to know that there is hope. And to remember you're not alone. We're in this all together. And find a group that cares as much as you do.
There's definitely lots of groups.
So now I want to talk about Wendy Williams, former radio shock jock, host of her own talk show for 15 years, and beloved icon, 59-year-old Wendy Williams. Did you ever watch Wendy Williams?
Yeah, she's entertaining.
She was fun. She always seemed like a very likable person. What about you, Gus? Not personally. I also never really watched her. I don't like gossip.
I think she's likable if she didn't talk about you on the show.
She talked about me?
No, if she didn't,
Oh.
because she talks about certain, celebrities and sometimes
That's
the
her whole
gossip.
show.
I know, but sometimes it's not so nice.
No, I mean that's why people loved her, and she's been that her whole life. So and I remember she was on Kiss FM out here.
Yeah, she started on radio.
Yeah,
right?
she was out on radio. Big star, huge star, and for many years. So she, at 59 years old, Wendy Williams was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia and primary progressive aphasia. I'll explain what those are. This is the same illness that affects actor Bruce Willis, for those of you who know. Frontotemporal dementia is a rare disease that affects parts of the brain controlling behavior and language. So let's talk about that. Frontal lobe essentially gets affected. That's the area behind your forehead, and temporal lobe, side of your head. And these parts of the brain shrink as the disease gets worse. And frontotemporal dementia usually occurs in people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And it can affect a person's personality. Well, it does affect their personality. I don't know how you can get away from that. It does affect your personality. You have a loss of inhibition and inappropriate behavior. And it can be mistaken for depression or bipolar disorder. So it can take years to diagnose because people think they're looking at something else. Because what you're primarily seeing is this behavior change, and you're like, what's going on? So you think something's going on mentally with the person. Are they using drugs? Are they depressed? Are they having this issue? When it's in fact a brain issue that's happening. You may do things that bother other people, and you really don't understand why they're bothering other people. So I think Wendy Williams had a history of this because she would say nasty things about people, or maybe not nasty, but she would say controversial things. Let's just say that. And then she would get in trouble, or people would have an issue with it. So I'll talk about there's a documentary that's out now that I was watching, and this is what brought this all into light. The disease also includes primary progressive aphasia. The symptoms begin gradually, and they often before age 65, and they get worse over time. People with primary progressive aphasia. So aphasia is having trouble, and it's either expressing your thoughts or understanding thoughts and finding words. So let's talk about an expressive aphasia is understanding what other people are saying. Understanding what it's expressing your own terms, finding words, things like that. And receptive aphasia is understanding what other people are saying. So what causes it? We don't know. There's caused by damage to the neurons, the brain's information carriers, but we don't really know the underlying disease causes. So we can't really point at something and say, so this is one of those tragic things that happens to somebody and we just can't point to a reason. It's very unfortunate. People with a family history of the condition are more likely to develop it. Most people who have the condition report no family history of dementia. So it seems to hit somewhat randomly. There's no cure. You can do speech therapy and physical therapy, but there's only help with some of the symptoms. But then it's progressive, which means it's going to get worse. So drugs tend to be things like antidepressants and drugs for Parkinson's. So it's just one of those downward courses that you just have to manage as it goes. It typically lasts 2 to 10 years, and most need caregiving or nursing support as symptoms get worse. And the financial burdens are immense, about $100,000 a year on average for long-term care and support, probably more in California. So Wendy Williams, as you guys, I don't know if you're a big fan of hers, you may know she has Graves' disease as well. It's an autoimmune disorder that causes hyperthyroidism. There's no cure for that either, and that's what causes her eyes to kind of bulge out recently, if you've seen pictures of her recently. And she also has lymphedema, which causes this fluid buildup. That's a network of lymph vessels and tissues that carry lymph throughout the body, and they get blocked up, and they cause swelling and pain, and also she said she can't feel in most of her feet. And it was very apparent in the documentary that there are some alcohol issues as well. So I was watching this documentary series, and this is why some of this is out. And I do recommend, perhaps if you're curious, you can see this, but it's very, very hard to watch. Let me just say, it's called Where is Wendy Williams? It's on Lifetime. You really see a notable decline that's happened in her. There was another documentary, I think, called Wendy Williams is a Mess. I went and watched that, and basically she's much higher functioning there, so you can see the decline in just a couple of years.
How sad.
Yeah, it is sad because she was so immensely talented. And, not my thing. Gossip isn't my thing at all.
But she was good at it.
But she was so likable. She could sat there in a chair and held court with millions of people.
I think the fact that she started on radio gave her such a just natural way of doing it,
She could just talk and be entertaining, and that was that. So there were some huge family issues, and she has a financial conservator, which is Wells Fargo, which she continually complains about. So I don't know how to talk about this. Let me just say how fans are reacting. So these were on X, and let me see. One fan said, I hope that Wendy Williams gets the help she needs, and maybe this show will help with that, but something about this isn't sitting right with me. That was exactly my experience. One user wrote on social media site, she can't consent to being on camera like this. It feels exploitative. And I felt that as well. And I had to question about what point, because right now she is a financial conservator. She can still make her own decisions. That is legally allowed. So she can consent until she can't. And then, so that she would have to have a court to make that decision.
When she can consent and when she can't, or how do we find that out? Like
remember Britney had a conservator that she had not just over her finances but over
everything.
Her whole life. And as you may know, I'm a conservator too for my brother. But that is a bigger process. Financial is just the bank taking control of the finances because they felt that maybe either I don't know their reasoning, but I think they felt that either her or somebody else was going to take advantage of her. Which
that's kind of good.
Real
wow.
risk. So,
I mean, and that happens. That happens a lot.
Unfortunately, and she's quite wealthy. And you can see how wealthy she is in this show. Another fan wrote, the Wendy Williams documentary is sad, S-A-D. I mean, like big letters. And another one wrote, I'm not sure who greenlit Where is Wendy Williams. In my opinion, it wasn't a good idea. So,
I mean, I think there's a way you can go about doing a documentary, but I need to watch this because I feel like, it wasn't done tastefully, maybe.
It made me feel for her so much. She seems like such a lovely person. I wanted to, it's weird. I mean, perhaps I wanted to hug her. She always seemed rather invulnerable, strong, imposing, but here you saw the frailty the fear in her eyes and the difficulty and the confusion. And you saw her having trouble finding words. She could land on the correct word, but you saw her coming up with maybe not always the best words, but still it got the point across. You saw her being impulsive. You saw her doing things that worked against her. And you saw her hurting her own relationships, although she may have had her reasons for doing that. It was a concern in watching this. And the only thing I can think of that's good about this documentary, she did live her life out on camera, and maybe that she wants to share this part of her life as well. She's been open before. She's been an open book pretty much the whole way, and I think that's why she's so loved. But this is a difficult chapter to watch, and maybe it will also help prevent more negatives from happening to her, much like the Britney Spears documentary helped in that process with her conservatorship. Maybe this will also help that people develop an understanding about what this illness is, how someone suffers, how difficult it is, and that maybe we can get some thoughts about how to help people in long-term care, that we don't abandon people when they get older or when they have mental difficulties. So maybe that's the one good I can say.
I'm definitely going to watch it because it sounds like it's a must.
I think it's actually compelling. It's on Lifetime, so let me do that plug. I had to search for it. You can actually download it on Roku at least and watch it with commercials. So there you go. So that's it. This wraps up the show for today. This is Dr. Greg, Dr. Greg, G with a G, Dr. Greg, Brian, and Gus, bidding you all farewell. Until next time, be present, be flexible, and be kind.